Uh, On to our main events. Curtis Dozier teaches in the Department of Greek and Roman Studies at Vassar College and is the director of Pharos, Doing Justice to the Classics, a website that documents and responds to appropriations of Greco-Roman antiquity by hate groups. He's currently working on a book-length treatment of that phenomenon and the challenge it poses to the practice of classical studies in the 21st century. Welcome, Dr. Curtis Dozier, and his paper today is Teaching White Supremacy in Classics Using the Pharos Archive. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for that introduction, and thanks to the organizers for the invitation to be here today. Very excited to be here to talk about something that I released on my site earlier this week. I'll share my slides quickly here. Earlier this week, I announced a set of materials on my website intended to support instructors who wish to incorporate critical analysis of contemporary white supremacist appropriations of Greco-Roman antiquity into their courses. And my purpose here today is to introduce those materials to you, describe their rationale, and most importantly, seek your feedback about them. I can't really imagine a better group of people to present them to for that purpose, considering the other panelists here. And I just want to the panelists say, you know, most of you in a traditional sense are my juniors, but I want to say that I continue to learn so much from you, especially from your social media presence and your online articles. Everything you write has been such a valuable contribution to our field, in my view, and to my personal journey as a classical scholar. So thank you for that, and it's an honor to be here with you today. And here I am presenting these materials wedged between two papers that I needed to hear before working on this, probably. I actually kind of wish I was presenting after Nadira, speaking about the impact of inadequate teacher training in classics, because as I was putting together these materials, I was very conscious of my lack of professional training in how to do it. So I may just be providing an example of what she's talking about here. And actually, that's true, I think, also of listening to Nicolette and Jonah's paper, which, you know, has so much of, you know, I'm only beginning to think about how that really should be, what they're talking about should be informing what I'm trying to do with these materials. And I think just as my initial reaction to their paper, I'm feeling that what I'm trying to do has a potential to engage in critical pedagogy, but the materials really, for them to be used well, it requires a theoretical outlet on the part of the instructor that will use them, that their paper makes me see all the ways that I lack that critical outlook, and that in a sense I'm assuming that the instructors will have it, and that's probably not the assumption I should make given what they are saying. So there's a lot for me to think about there, and I hope we can get into that more in the Q&A. And seriously, that's the reason I'm here. Yes, to share my materials, but really to seek expert consultation and feedback on their design, and really on the desirability of such materials. In the materials themselves, I've put a content warning because they they contain explicit expressions of white supremacy and dehumanization of many people. And I think a content warning is appropriate for this talk too, where I'll be sharing some of these materials that promote white supremacy, related conspiracy theories, as well as misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, and ableism. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about them, but they are part of the presentation because that's part of what I'm trying to create a structure for people to be able to present. And I think it's especially important to acknowledge this in a week where the real world violent consequences of racism and misogyny have been made so terrifyingly clear, with the murder of 8 people, many of them Asian, and in Georgia. And I can give you an example of what I mean by the connection between these interactions with antiquity of contemporary white supremacist movements and the real world consequences here. This is an essay which I included in my survey of discussions of misogyny and gender. And the claim here in this essay of male entitlement to sex and the accompanying threat of violence, which is the civil war threatened here if male entitlement for sex is not ensured by the dominant culture. These claims correspond precisely to the rhetoric used by the accused murderers, and I think I just want to acknowledge that these sites really establish the intellectual context in which these acts of violence take place. And as you can see in the example here, references to Greco-Roman antiquity is often part of that rhetoric. If anybody is not familiar with my site, Pharos, so I'll give a quick introduction to that. I launched it in the end of 2017 to document and critically respond to appropriations of antiquity by hate groups. Over time, the site has grown. It's received a lot of press, mostly good, some bad. We've over time reached a growing audience, just past 300,000 page views in more than 180 countries, which is not a huge number given the size of the web, but it's a pretty niche product, white supremacy and classical antiquity. So what these numbers tell me is that it's sort of filling a need that goes beyond the classics community, and that's something I'm glad to see. The site has changed a little over time. My primary focus now is more on, part of my focus is on current events when Greco-Roman antiquity appears in them, such as at the Capitol attacks. But my major focus is on what's sometimes called highbrow white nationalism. That is the people and the websites who position themselves as thought leaders in the contemporary white ethno-nationalist movement. And here I have some examples of the kinds of things I find. An argument about that sort of totalitarian and eugenic forms of social organization are desirable because Plato recommends them as part of the ideal state in the Republic, that cultural diversity and difference will necessarily cause conflict and violence based on a reading of Aristotle's Politics, a analysis of Stoic philosophy as actually, we often think of Stoic philosophy as something very interesting to misogynists online, but the real white ethno-nationalists don't like Stoicism. They see it as a kind of promotion of cosmopolitanism and the multiracial society. So there's a critique of Stoicism there. And then on the, let's see, the lower right there on a xenophobic site, a comparison of a discussion of the so-called fall of the Roman Empire as a result of what they term an invasion, a population movement, as a warning for contemporary Americans. And the contributors to these sites and the editors of these sites, they don't look like the American caricature of uneducated, backwards, usually Southern racists. They don't look like what the Capitol terrorists look like. They look actually a lot more like me. They have PhDs. They hold or have held academic appointments in many cases. They're well-traveled. They're fluent in multiple foreign languages. And perhaps most similarly, they believe deeply in the relevance of classical antiquity to the contemporary world. They believe that as fervently as any advocate for the relevance of classics that I've ever met within our field. And so over time of working on this material, I've come to realize that the challenge of these appropriations is not that they misrepresent, or some people use the term abuse, the past. They actually understand very well that the patriarchal, enslaving, xenophobic and imperialist world of Greco-Roman antiquity is very congruent to their beliefs without significant distortion.